The gavel sounded like a gunshot in the dusty square of Silver Creek. It was 1876, Montana Territory, and Grace Winter was for sale. Her hair, once the color of honey, was now a tangled mess of dirt and despair. Tears cut clean paths down her grimy cheeks. Coarse rope dug into her wrists, a constant, biting reminder of the life she'd lost. She'd come from Boston, from a world of books and afternoon tea. Now she was just property. $500 for this fine specimen, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice greased with opportunism. He gestured to Grace as if she were a prize mare. Look at her, gentlemen. Young, healthy, and educated. She'll cook, she'll clean, and she'll warm your bed if you treat her right. A wave of crude laughter rolled through the crowd of miners and drifters. Grace squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out their leering faces. Just 3 weeks ago, she was traveling with her uncle, her last living relative. They were heading west to start over after influenza had claimed her parents. Then came the ambush. Bandits in the night. They killed her uncle without a second thought and took everything. They sold her to a trader who laughed when she spoke of laws and rights. In Silver Creek, the only law was the highest bidder. 500. Do I hear 550? The auctioneer's voice cracked the hot afternoon air. 600, a drunken voice slurred from the front. Grace's eyes snapped open. A pot-bellied man with yellow teeth was grinning at her. A shiver of pure revulsion ran down her spine. 700, came another voice, this one cold and calculating. It belonged to a silver-haired gentleman who looked at her like she was a line item in a ledger. His name was Harrison, and his eyes held no warmth at all. 800, the drunk shouted, swaying. The numbers kept climbing, each one a hammer blow to her fading hope. She was alone. No family, no friends, no money. Just a terrifying, unknown future. She'd heard the stories. Women sold like this ended up as slaves on remote ranches or trapped in dusty brothels, their spirits broken piece by piece. She would not let that be her story. She would rather die. Then a new number cut through the noise. $1,500. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. The crowd went silent, a collective gasp sucking the air out of the square. Every head turned, trying to find the source of the impossible bid. Grace followed their gaze, her tear-filled eyes landing on a tall, shadowed figure at the very back of the crowd. He stood apart from the rest, a specter of stillness in the chaotic scene. The man stepped forward. The sea of dusty miners and ranchers parted for him as if by instinct. His face was mostly hidden by the brim of a wide hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. He wore a simple cotton shirt, a leather vest, and boots that had clearly seen more miles than most men do in a lifetime. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the handle of his pistol a dark promise in the afternoon sun. He didn't look rich. He didn't look like a man who threw away fortunes. He looked dangerous. 1,500 going once, the auctioneer called, his voice trembling with excitement. Harrison, the silver-haired man, snarled. His face was flushed with fury, as if he'd been personally insulted. 2,000, he shouted, his voice tight with rage. This was more than a transaction for him. It was a contest. The stranger didn't even flinch. He just reached into his vest, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small, heavy-looking leather pouch. He didn't open it. He just held it. 3,000, he said. His voice was deep, steady, and carried across the square like the toll of a distant bell. It wasn't a bid. It was a final judgment. The crowd gasped. $3,000. It was enough to buy a man a whole new life out here, to buy a sprawling ranch, a business, anything he wanted. It was an insane amount of money for one woman. The auctioneer's eyes darted around, but no one else dared to speak. Harrison glared, his fists clenched, but he was beaten. He knew it. Sold! To the gentleman in the back! Grace's knees felt weak. She thought she might faint. Who was this man? Was he her savior, or had she just been sold to a different kind of monster, one with deeper pockets for his cruelty? He approached the platform, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust. He handed the pouch to the auctioneer, who counted the gold coins with greedy, trembling fingers before handing over the end of her rope. The stranger took it, and then he did something no one expected. He pulled a knife from his belt. Grace flinched, pulling back, her heart hammering against her ribs. But he wasn't looking at her with malice. He was looking at the ropes. With one swift, clean slice, he cut through the bonds on her wrists. The rope fell away. She was free. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "My name is Finn Callahan," he said. His eyes, a shocking, piercing blue, locked onto hers. "And from this moment on, you'll only know joy." Grace just stared, unable to process his words. He gently draped his own jacket over her trembling shoulders. "Come with me, miss," he said, his voice louder now, for the benefit of the stunned crowd. "My wagon's this way." She followed him in a daze as he led her through the silent mob. The silver-haired man, Harrison, stepped forward to block their path. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You can't just free her, Callahan," he hissed. "That's not how this works. I had plans for her." Finn didn't stop walking. He just turned his head slightly, his hand resting near the butt of his gun. "I paid for her, Harrison. She's my property, and I can do with my property as I please." Harrison spat on the ground, his eyes burning with a hatred that seemed far too personal for a failed business deal. He said nothing more, but the look he gave them was a promise. This wasn't over. Finn helped Grace onto the seat of a sturdy wagon, hitched to two strong horses. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Why?" she finally whispered, her throat raw. "Why did you do that?" Finn didn't look at her. He just stared at the road ahead, his jaw tight. "No decent person should be sold like cattle," he said simply. But there was something in his eyes, a shadow of an old, deep pain. He was telling the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. "But the money! $3,000, she stammered. "It's just money," he said, his voice flat. "I was saving it. For land. To expand my ranch." He finally glanced at her, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice. This seemed more important. "What do you want from me?" Grace asked, suspicion still clinging to her like dust. Men like him didn't exist. Men didn't spend a fortune on a stranger out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price. "Nothing," he said, but his answer came too quickly. "Once we're clear of this town, you're free to go wherever you want. I'll see you get there safely." She watched him as they rolled out of Silver Creek, leaving the leering crowds and the stench of despair behind. He couldn't be much older than 30, but his face was weathered, carved by sun and wind and something else. Something she couldn't name. He was kind, yes, but there was a hardness to him, a coiled tension just beneath the surface. He wasn't just a simple rancher. He was a man with secrets. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "My uncle is dead. I have no one." Finn nodded slowly as if he expected this. "I have a ranch. A day's ride from here. You can stay there. I have an empty bunkhouse. You'll have your privacy." The offer was generous, but it felt rehearsed, planned, as if buying her was just the first step in a much larger scheme. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," she said, her mind racing. "Finn," he corrected her, "and there's no debt." As the wagon pulled away from the town, Grace felt a tiny flicker of hope, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. She had escaped the auction block, yes, but she had a terrible feeling she had just walked into a different kind of cage. Finn Callahan hadn't just saved a stranger, he had bought Grace Winters specifically, and she had no idea why. The silence in the wagon wasn't comfortable. It was heavy. Finn kept his eyes on the trail, his hands steady on the reins, but his shoulders were tight. He was a man on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every call of a distant bird, made his eyes dart to the horizon. He wasn't just putting distance between them and Silver Creek. He was running. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, he pulled the wagon off the main trail, guiding the horses into a small, sheltered canyon near a stream. "We'll make camp here," he announced. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace that spoke of years spent on the run. He wasn't just a rancher setting up camp. He was a soldier securing a perimeter. He laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire he built, creating a clear and deliberate space between them. He made a simple stew of dried beef and beans. As they ate, Grace decided she couldn't take the silence any longer. "That man in town, Harrison, you knew him." It wasn't a question. Finn stopped stirring his stew. He didn't look up. "Our paths have crossed." "He looked at you like he wanted to kill you," she pressed. Finally, Finn met her gaze across the flickering flames. The friendly rancher facade was gone. In its place was the man she'd first seen in the crowd, the hard, dangerous man. "Harrison wants a lot of things he can't have," Finn said, his voice low and cold. "The feeling is mutual." A chill went through her that had nothing to do with the night air. This went deeper than a bidding war. This was old. This was personal. "Were you really going to buy land with that money?" she asked, testing him. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "Been saving for 5 years. My place is small, hemmed in on all sides." He shrugged, a gesture that didn't match the tension in his jaw. "Land will still be there next year." "Why me, Finn?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Out of all the people in that town, why spend a fortune on me?" He was quiet for a long, long time. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the darkness. She thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice thick with a pain so raw it was startling. "I had a sister, Fiona. Raiders came through our family's farm in Missouri during the war. They took her." He looked at Grace then, and his eyes were hollowed-out things. "They sold her, just like they were trying to sell you. I never saw her again." The story was heartbreaking. It was also the perfect explanation. A little too perfect. It explained everything away so neatly. It made him a hero, a tragic figure driven by righteous grief. But it didn't explain the way Harrison had looked at him. It didn't explain the way Finn held his gun, or the way he scanned the horizon for threats that weren't there. It didn't feel like the whole story. "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered, and she truly was. But her mind was still working, fitting the pieces together. The ambush on her uncle's wagon. The bandits had been brutally efficient. They knew exactly when and where to strike. They took everything, but they had been careful not to harm her, as if they were under orders, as if her value was in being sold intact. "Get some rest, Miss Winters," Finn said, his voice suddenly formal again. He stood up, turning his back on her to check on the horses. The conversation was over. Grace lay down on her bedroll, but she didn't sleep. She listened to the night sounds and the crackle of the fire. She watched Finn, who didn't lie down at all. He sat with his back against a rock, a rifle resting across his knees, and stared out into the darkness. He wasn't guarding her from the wilderness. He was standing watch. He was expecting company. And Grace realized with a jolt of ice-cold certainty. Her rescue was no random act of kindness. It was an interception. Someone else was supposed to buy her, and Finn Callahan had gotten in the way. The question was who? And why was she so important? The next day's ride was tense. Finn spoke little, his eyes constantly scanning the rolling hills around them. The beautiful Montana landscape, which should have felt like a promise of freedom, now felt menacing, full of hidden dangers. Grace's mind churned. The ambush, the auction, Harrison's fury, Finn's strange, guarded behavior. It was all connected. She was the link. Late in the afternoon, Finn pointed toward a valley nestled between two large hills. "There it is," he said. "Callahan Ranch." It was less a ranch and more a small fortress. The log house was solid, with small, defensible windows. The barn was large and sturdy. But what caught Grace's eye was the high fence that encircled the main buildings. It wasn't a fence for keeping cattle in. It was a fence for keeping people out. A black and white dog came tearing out to meet them, barking furiously, not playfully. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the barn. He was shorter than Finn, powerfully built, with dark hair and a wary expression. He wasn't holding a pitchfork. He was holding a shotgun. "That's Gabriel," Finn said. "He helps me run the place." It was clear Gabriel was more than a ranch hand. He was a lookout. "Trouble?" Gabriel called out, his eyes fixed on Grace, his shotgun held at a low ready. "A change of plans," Finn replied, swinging down from the wagon. He helped Grace down, his touch impersonal, efficient. "Gabriel, this is Miss Grace Winters. She'll be staying in the bunkhouse." Gabriel nodded at her, but his eyes were full of questions for Finn. "Harrison?" he asked, his voice low. Finn gave a short, sharp nod. "He was there, made a play for her." Gabriel's knuckles went white on the stock of his gun. So they had been expecting Harrison at the auction. They knew. "Miss Winters," Finn explained, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Ran into some trouble. She's staying here." Gabriel's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Grace, a flicker of understanding, maybe even pity, in his dark eyes. "The bunkhouse is ready," he said to her. "It's clean." Finn led her to a small cabin set a good 50 yards from the main house. It was simple, clean, and felt strangely like a well-appointed prison cell. "You'll be safe here," he told her, and the words hung in the air. Safe from what? Or from whom? After he left, Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her heart pounding. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a safe house, and she was the asset they were protecting. She unpacked her small bag. All she had left from her old life was a change of clothes, a brush, and a small leather-bound book. Her uncle's journal. The bandits had missed it, tucked away in a secret compartment of her bag. She hadn't had the heart to read it yet. Now she opened it, her hands trembling. The last entry was dated the day before the ambush. Her uncle's familiar script filled the page. "Met with Harrison in Silver Creek. The man is a snake. He knows about the deed and is trying to cheat me out of the agreed price. He believes because I am traveling with Grace, I am vulnerable. He underestimates us both. I have hidden the original deed. If anything happens to me, Grace must take it to the territorial office in Helena. It is the only proof of ownership to the entire valley. It is her inheritance. Harrison's claim is fraudulent, but without this paper, he will win." Grace's blood ran cold. The valley. The entire valley. She looked out the small window. Finn's ranch, his small, fortified home, was just a tiny speck in the vast expanse of land that stretched to the horizon. It was all hers. Her uncle had bought it, and Harrison had killed him for it. The auction wasn't about her body. It was about the deed. Harrison must have thought she knew where it was. He was going to buy her, torture her, and get the location of the deed from her. Finn hadn't just saved her from servitude. He had saved her from a man who had murdered her only family. But that raised an even more terrifying question. How did Finn know? How did he know to be at that auction? How did he know Harrison would be there? How did he know she was the key to the valley? There was only one possible answer. Finn Callahan had been working with her uncle. That night, a storm rolled in, trapping them all inside the main house. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and rain lashed against the windows. The atmosphere inside was just as tense. Gabriel sat by the door cleaning his shotgun. Finn stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Grace knew she had to confront him. My uncle, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. You knew him. Finn's whole body went rigid. He turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask. I did. You were working with him, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He hired you to protect me. Finn's eyes flickered to Gabriel, then back to her. He gave a single, reluctant nod. Your Uncle William knew Harrison was dangerous. He suspected Harrison might try something on the trail. William hired me to follow you, to keep you safe from a distance. If you made it to Helena, fine. If you ran into trouble, I was the insurance policy. The ambush, she whispered. I was too far back. By the time I got there, it was over. They were taking you. His voice was laced with guilt. My only option was to follow them to Silver Creek and get you back. I never thought Harrison would be so bold as to try and buy you in a public auction. It all clicked into place. The money he'd spent wasn't his life savings. It was her uncle's. Money set aside for this exact purpose. The ranch wasn't just his home. It was the base of operations, the place he was supposed to bring her to if things went wrong. Everything made a terrible, tragic kind of sense. The deed, Grace said, her voice flat. That's what this is about. My uncle hid the deed to this valley. Harrison killed him for it. The look on Finn's face was all the confirmation she needed. William told me he had it hidden, Finn said. He didn't tell me where. He said it was safer if I didn't know. That way, Harrison couldn't get it from me. Suddenly, the front door rattled, a loud, insistent banging that wasn't the wind. Gabriel was on his feet in an instant, shotgun raised. Finn drew his pistol, moving to stand beside the door. Who is it? He called out. Just a few travelers caught in the storm, a voice shouted back. Looking for a dry place to wait it out. Grace knew that voice. She'd heard it just yesterday. The scarred man, the drifter who had come to the ranch, Harrison's man. They weren't looking for shelter. They were here for the deed, and they thought she had it. We don't have room, Finn yelled back. A harsh laugh answered him. We're not asking. The sentence was punctuated by the deafening blast of a shotgun. Wood splintered from the door, just inches from Finn's head. Grace screamed. The siege had begun. The night exploded into a nightmare of sound and fury. Gunshots cracked through the storm, the flashes of light illuminating the terrifying faces of the men outside. Glass shattered as a bullet punched through a window. Gabriel returned fire from one side of the room, Finn from the other, their movements a deadly practiced dance. They weren't ranchers defending their home. They were soldiers holding a line. Grace huddled behind an overturned table, her uncle's journal clutched to her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and revelation. Harrison hadn't sent his men here just for the deed. He sent them because he couldn't risk her and Finn talking. He sent them to silence everyone who knew the truth. They're trying to flank the barn, Gabriel yelled over the gunfire. Stay here. Keep your head down, Finn ordered Grace, his face grim in the flashing light. He and Gabriel laid down a volley of covering fire, then Finn broke for the back door. I'll draw them off. Keep them pinned down, he shouted to Gabriel before disappearing into the storm. Grace was alone with Gabriel, the sound of the battle now split between the house and the barn. The men outside were yelling, their voices carried on the wind. They were getting frustrated, impatient. He knows she's in there, one of them roared. Burn it! Burn the whole damn house down! Panic seized Grace. She saw a flicker of orange light through a shattered window. A torch. They were going to set the house on fire. They were going to burn her alive. She had to do something. She had to get out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Her gaze fell on the fireplace. It was large, built of stone. The fire had long since died down to embers. Could she? Gabriel! She screamed. The fireplace! Is there a way out? Gabriel glanced over, his face streaked with gunpowder. The chimney's too narrow! You'll never make it! But Grace wasn't looking at the chimney. She was looking at the large, flat stone at the back of the hearth. It looked different from the others the mortar around it knew her. It was a secret. Her uncle had been a man of secrets. A secret compartment in her bag. Maybe a secret in the house he'd planned to share with her. Driven by a desperate hope, she crawled toward the fireplace, ignoring Gabriel's protests. She pushed on the stone. It didn't move. She pushed harder, her whole body straining. With a low groan of scraping rock, the stone shifted inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening behind it. A priest hole, a hidden passage. "Go!" Gabriel yelled, firing another blast from his shotgun. "Get to the creek! Follow it north!" Grace didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the dark, dusty passage, the smell of old soot and damp earth filling her lungs. The stone scraped shut behind her, plunging her into absolute darkness. She could hear the muffled sounds of the gunfight fading as she crawled forward on her hands and knees. The passage was tight, claustrophobic. It twisted and turned, leading down, away from the house. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from the fire and the guns. After what felt like an eternity, her hands met not dirt, but wood. A wooden wall. She felt around frantically until her fingers found the edge of a small door. She pushed it open and tumbled out into the wet, cold night. She was in the barn. The smell of hay and animals surrounded her. Through the cracks in the barn walls, she could see the flashes of gunfire. She could see the main house, and terrifyingly, she could see the orange flames licking up one side of it. She had to run. She had to get to the creek, just as Gabriel had told her. She crept to the large barn doors, peering out. Finn was pinned down behind a water trough, exchanging shots with two of Harrison's men. He was outnumbered. He wouldn't last long. She had to create a diversion. Her eyes landed on a lantern hanging from a hook. An idea, reckless and desperate, formed in her mind. The barn was full of dry hay. It would go up like a tinderbox. It was a terrible risk, but it was the only chance they had. She lit the lantern, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Taking a deep breath, she threw it as hard as she could into the largest pile of hay in the center of the barn. The effect was instantaneous. The hay erupted in a whoosh of flame, a brilliant, terrifying inferno that lit up the entire yard. The men who had been shooting at Finn cried out in alarm, turning their attention to the suddenly blazing barn. That was the opening Finn needed. He rose from behind the trough, his pistol bucking in his hand. 2 shots. 2 men fell. Grace didn't wait to see more. She sprinted from the back of the burning barn, plunging into the darkness of the woods behind the ranch. She could hear shouting behind her, but she didn't look back. She ran, her lungs burning, the thorny branches tearing at her clothes and skin. She found the creek, its cold water splashing over her boots, and turned north, just as Gabriel had instructed. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, collapsing onto the muddy bank, gasping for breath, her body trembling with cold and terror. The ranch was lost. The barn was burning. She didn't know if Finn or Gabriel were alive or dead. She was alone again, hunted in the dark, with nothing but her uncle's journal and the secret it contained. And she knew, with chilling certainty, that Harrison's men were now hunting for her. Grace lay shivering on the cold ground for what felt like hours, listening. The sounds of the gunfight had died down, replaced by the howl of the wind and the crackle of the distant fire. Were Finn and Gabriel dead? Had Harrison's men won? Or had they simply fled into the night to regroup? She didn't know which was worse. She had to keep moving. Gabriel had told her to follow the creek north. He must have had a reason. A rendezvous point? Another safe house? Clinging to that sliver of hope, she pushed herself to her feet and began to walk, stumbling through the darkness, the icy water of the creek soaking her boots and the hem of her dress. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through her. She was a city girl, completely out of her element. But the thought of what Harrison would do to her if he caught her was a powerful motivator. She pushed on, her determination hardening with every step. Her uncle hadn't died for nothing. She wouldn't let him. As the first hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, she saw it. Tucked into a narrow ravine, almost completely hidden by overgrown bushes, was a small, dilapidated miner's cabin. Smoke curled weakly from its stone chimney. It had to be the place. With her heart in her throat, she approached cautiously. The door creaked open before she reached it. Finn stood in the doorway. He was alive. Relief washed over her so powerfully her knees buckled. He caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her as he helped her inside. Gabriel was there too, his arm in a crude sling, a bloody bandage wrapped around his shoulder. But he was alive. "The fire," Finn said, his voice rough with emotion as he held her. "I saw the barn go up. I thought you were inside." "It was a diversion," she whispered, her face buried in his chest. "To help you." He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, and looked at her with a new kind of respect. "It worked," he said. "You saved my life." He led her to a small fire crackling in the hearth. "We drove them off, for now, but they'll be back, and Harrison will be with them next time." "They burned the house," Gabriel said, his voice grim. "The barn is gone. We have nothing left." "We have this," Grace said. She pulled out her uncle's journal. "And we have the truth." She opened it to the last page and read the entry aloud. She told them everything, about her inheritance, about the deed, about Harrison's fraud. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the small cabin. Finn stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "The deed," he breathed. "Your uncle never told me what Harrison was after, only that it was something valuable enough to kill for." "He says he hid it," Grace said, looking at the journal. "But he doesn't say where. He just says, 'If anything happens to me, Grace must take it to the territorial office in Helena.'" She looked up at them, her eyes pleading. "What does that mean?" Finn took the journal, his brow furrowed in concentration as he read the words himself. He traced the script with his finger. "He wasn't talking about the journal, Grace. He was talking about you. Grace must take it to the territorial office. Not a letter, not a map. It." He looked from the journal to her. "The deed isn't a piece of paper hidden somewhere. It's on you, or in you." Grace stared at him, uncomprehending, and then her eyes widened in horror and realization. She thought back to the last peaceful afternoon she'd spent with her uncle, the day before the ambush. He'd been working on his saddle, restitching the leather seat. He'd been quiet, preoccupied. He'd said it was just a simple repair. But he wasn't a saddler. He was a lawyer, a meticulous, careful man who left nothing to chance. Without a word, she reached for the small carpet bag the bandits had let her keep. Inside was the saddle. Her uncle had insisted she take it, saying it was better made than the one on her own horse. At the time, she'd thought it a strange, sentimental request. Now she understood. Finn handed her his knife. With trembling fingers, she carefully sliced open the stitches on the leather seat of the small saddle. And there, nestled between the layers of leather and stuffing, was a slim oilskin packet. She pulled it out and unwrapped it. Inside was a crisp, official-looking document. The territorial deed for the entire valley, signed and sealed, legally registered to her uncle, William Winters, and naming her, Grace Elizabeth Winters, as his sole heir. It was all there. The proof, the key to everything. "He outsmarted him," Gabriel said in awe. "He put it in the one place Harrison would never think to look." "Now we have it," Finn said, his voice ringing with a new energy. "But it's useless unless we can get it to Helena. The nearest marshal is in Benton, 2 days' ride north. Harrison knows this. He'll have every trail between here and there watched." "So we don't take the trail," Grace said, her voice surprisingly steady. The fear she'd been living with for weeks was being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was her fight now. Is there another way? Finn and Gabriel exchanged a look. There is one, Finn said slowly. Through the Blackfoot lands. It's dangerous. The treaty is fragile. Settlers aren't welcome. They generally leave folks alone, Gabriel added, as long as you show respect and don't cause trouble. But Harrison, he has no respect for anyone. He's clashed with them before. They won't give him safe passage. It's our only chance, Finn said, looking at Grace. It's a hard ride, and if we run into the wrong party... It's a risk I'm willing to take, Grace said, her chin held high. Harrison took everything from me. I won't let him win. They left that night, under the cover of darkness. Gabriel, his arm still injured, stayed behind. I'll lead them on a false trail south, he promised. Buy you some time. Good luck, boss. You too, ma'am. Finn and Grace rode north, sharing a single horse, the precious deed, tucked securely inside Finn's shirt. They moved through the wilderness like ghosts, avoiding the main trails, sticking to the deep woods and rocky paths. Finn guided them with an instinct that was almost supernatural, reading the stars, the trees, the very lay of the land. On the second day, they crossed Miller's Creek, leaving the territory of settlers behind and entering the lands of the Blackfoot. The air here felt different, older, wilder. They saw signs of the tribe everywhere, faint trails, markings on trees, the distant smoke of a camp. They were being watched. They both knew it. Late in the afternoon, as they were watering their horse at a river, they appeared. 4 Blackfoot warriors on horseback, materializing from the trees as silently as the setting sun. They were armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted for war. They formed a silent, intimidating circle around Finn and Grace. Finn slowly raised an empty hand, a sign of peace. He spoke to them in their own language, his voice calm and respectful. Grace couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. He wasn't begging or threatening. He was explaining. The lead warrior, a stern-faced man with a scar across his eye, listened without expression. When Finn was finished, the warrior spoke, his eyes fixed on Grace. Finn translated for her. He asks who you are. Tell him I am the daughter of William Winters, Grace said, her voice clear and strong. Tell him a man named Harrison murdered my father and stole our land. We are going to Benton to find the law. Finn relayed her message. The warrior's expression flickered. He spoke one word. Harrison. The way he said it was a curse. He looked at his men, then back at Finn. He gave a sharp nod. He pointed north, then held up 3 fingers. He knows Harrison, Finn said to Grace, a note of relief in his voice. He says Harrison has broken treaties and brought nothing but pain to his people. He is granting us safe passage. He says Benton is a 3-day ride from here. And he says Harrison and his men crossed the creek this morning. They are hunting us. The warrior and his men then melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. They weren't just being hunted anymore. It was a race. A desperate 3-day race to Benton, with Harrison and his killers somewhere behind them in the wilderness, closing in. The next 3 days were a blur of exhaustion and fear. They barely slept, eating dried beef from their saddlebags, pushing their horse to its absolute limit. The landscape was brutal, unforgiving. Finn's skill as a frontiersman was the only thing that kept them alive. He found hidden paths, clean water, and shelter when they needed it most. Through it all, he was her rock, his quiet strength giving her the courage to keep going. They talked during the long hours in the saddle. She told him about her life in Boston, about her parents, her dreams. He told her more about Fiona, about the guilt that had haunted him for years, the feeling that he should have been there to protect her. In that harsh, beautiful wilderness, under the vast Montana sky, they stopped being a protector and his charge. They became partners, 2 broken people finding strength in each other. On the evening of the 3rd day, they saw it, the distant, flickering lights of a town. Benton. They had made it. But as they crested the final hill overlooking the town, Finn pulled their horse to a sudden stop. "What is it?" Grace asked, her heart sinking. Down below, on the main road leading into Benton, a group of riders was blocking the way. Even from a distance, Grace could recognize the silver hair of the man at their head. Harrison. He'd somehow gotten ahead of them. He was waiting for them. It was a trap. "He's blocked our only way in," Finn said, his voice a low growl. His hand went to the pistol at his hip. "There's no way we can fight through them," Grace said, despair creeping back in. They were so close, so damn close. Finn scanned the surrounding terrain, his eyes narrowed. "No," he said. "We can't fight through them, so we'll have to go around." He pointed to the side of the town, where a steep, rocky bluff dropped off into the darkness. "There, the old smelter works. It's been abandoned for years. There might be a tunnel, a way to get into town without being seen." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. They dismounted, leaving their exhausted horse behind, and began to make their way on foot toward the dark, skeletal remains of the smelter. The ground was treacherous, covered in loose rock and thorny brush. Twice, Grace slipped, and Finn's hand was there to catch her, strong and steady. They found an opening at the base of the bluff, a dark, gaping maw that smelled of rust and decay. "This is it," Finn whispered. "Stay close." He lit a small lantern, and they stepped into the darkness. The tunnel was cold and damp, winding its way deep into the earth. The air was thick and hard to breathe. After 100 yards, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber filled with the hulking, silent shapes of old machinery. "We're under the town now," Finn said, his voice echoing in the huge space. "There should be a ventilation shaft that leads up to the surface." He moved through the maze of rusted metal, holding the lantern high. And then they heard it. The scrape of boots on gravel. From the tunnel they'd just come through. They weren't alone. "He must have seen us," Finn breathed, pulling Grace behind a giant gear-toothed wheel. He drew his pistol, his eyes darting into the darkness. "He followed us." A voice cut through the cavern, oily and triumphant. Harrison's voice. "Callahan, I know you're in here, and I know you have the girl." He stepped into the lantern light, a cruel smile on his face. He wasn't alone. 2 of his men fanned out behind him, their guns raised. "I have to admit, you've been more trouble than I expected. But it ends now. Give me the deed and I'll let the girl live." "You're a liar, Harrison!" Finn yelled back, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Am I?" Harrison laughed, a chilling sound in the enclosed space. "Your sister didn't think so. Fiona, that was her name, wasn't it? A pretty thing, spirited. She fetched a high price down in the mining camps." A wave of pure, unadulterated rage came off Finn in a palpable wave. Grace felt it like a physical blow. This was the moment all the pieces clicked together. Finn's quest wasn't just for a nameless, faceless sister. Harrison wasn't just some random villain from his past. Harrison was the man who had led the raid, the man who had destroyed his family, the man who had sold his sister. "You," Finn whispered, his voice shaking with a fury so profound it was terrifying. "Yes, me," Harrison said, savoring the moment. "Now, the deed. The girl dies first if you make me ask again." This was it. The final move. Grace knew Finn was about to do something reckless, something driven by a decade of hate. She put her hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "There's another way." Her eyes darted around the cavern. High above them, suspended from the ceiling by thick ropes and pulleys, was a massive iron bucket, once used to haul ore. It was directly above Harrison. Finn saw it too. He understood instantly. He gave her a look, 1,000 emotions passing between them in a single second. Love, fear, trust. He nodded. "All right, Harrison," Finn shouted. "You win. I'm coming out." He started to step out from behind the wheel. Harrison's men tensed, their guns trained on him. It was the distraction Grace needed. She darted away from Finn toward a thick, frayed rope tied off on a rusted cleat on the wall. It was the rope holding the bucket. "No!" Harrison screamed, realizing too late what was happening. He raised his pistol to fire at her, but Finn was faster. He fired first. His bullet didn't hit Harrison. It hit the rusted chain of a lantern hanging just beside him, plunging their side of the cavern into darkness. Harrison's men fired wildly into the black, giving Grace the precious seconds she needed. She slashed at the thick rope with Finn's knife, sawing at the tough fibers with all her might. One strand snapped, then another. With a final, desperate heave, she cut through the last of the rope. There was a loud groaning sound from above, the shriek of protesting metal. The massive iron bucket, tons of solid steel, shuddered and then dropped. It fell with breathtaking speed, plummeting toward the spot where Harrison stood. He looked up, his face a perfect mask of terror in the flickering light of his men's lanterns. He didn't even have time to scream. The impact was like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundations of the cavern. Dust and debris filled the air. When it settled, the bucket was embedded in the ground. Harrison was gone. His men, stunned and terrified, dropped their guns and fled back into the tunnel. It was over. In the sudden, ringing silence, Finn rushed to Grace's side, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "You did it. It's over." They found the ventilation shaft and climbed out into the cool night air of Benton. They walked straight to the marshal's office. The deed, covered in dust but intact, was all the proof he needed. By morning, the story was all over town. The story of the Boston girl who had survived an ambush, who had been sold on an auction block, and who had brought down the most corrupt tyrant in the territory. The story of Grace Winters, the rightful owner of the entire Silver Creek Valley. Weeks later, they stood on a hill overlooking that valley. Their valley. The log house had been rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before. Gabriel was there, his arm healed, directing a crew of new ranch hands. A new life was beginning. "I promised you that you'd only know joy," Finn said, turning to her. His blue eyes, once filled with shadows and old pain, were now clear and full of love. "And I promised my uncle I would see justice done," Grace replied, her hand finding his. "I think we both kept our promises." Finn's hand tightened on hers. "Grace, I know this isn't the life you planned." She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "No," she said, "it's not. It's so much more." He had rescued her, yes. But she had rescued him too, right back. She had given him a reason to fight for the future, not just against the past. And he had shown her a strength she never knew she possessed. They had forged a new life, a new beginning, from the ashes of their old ones. Together. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that wasn't about rescue or gratitude, but about promise. The promise of a future they would build together, on their land, under the wide Montana sky. A future of joy. This story is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, courage can light a path to justice. If you were inspired by Grace's fight for what was rightfully hers, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You never know when you'll need a story to remind you to never, ever give up.